For those of you who don't know the name Alexander Butterfield, watch this.
Mr. Butterfield, are you aware of the installation of any listening devices in the Oval Office of the President?
I was aware of listening devices. Yes, sir.
That was in July of 1973 in the Senate Watergate hearings. That's Butterfield exposing publicly for the first time the existence of the secret White House taping system that would ultimately bring down President Nixon. It was a bombshell. Butterfield is the subject of a new book, The Last of the President's Men, by none other than famed Washington Post reporter Bob Woodward. And Bob is back with us now. Bob, the pause between Fred Thompson's question and Butterfield's answer, it seems like a whole lifetime in there. Why was his admission about the taping system so important?
Well, because it was Nixon's biggest secret. In fact, Nixon thought it would never be revealed. And of course, the tapes were, the Supreme Court said they had to be turned over to the prosecutors and investigators, and they provided the evidence that forced Nixon to resign. And Nixon was forced to resign, when you really look at it, by the Republicans, who were, as Barry Goldwater once told Carl Bernstein and myself, too many lies, too many crimes. And that's what it was.
Alexander Butterfield was in the tight circle that knew these tapes existed. Kissinger didn't even know, right, that the recordings existed. Right. And so he knew that it would nail the president. Why did he give them up?
Well, there's a long section in the book about this odyssey he took, and his ex-wife thinks he wanted to tell. Butterfield kind of denies that and then says, well, subconsciously, maybe I did. But, ultimately in our business, we try to figure out why people do things. And this finally, I think, gets to the answer. But you see that this is a story about power. This is about Nixon's power, and Butterfield, who had that place, office right next to the Oval Office for 3 years, was witnessed, a front row seat. And when I started talking to Butterfield, and realized that he had thousands of documents, some originals that he had taken out of the White House, some of this stuff, for somebody who spent years looking at Nixon, is shocking.
Well, that's what's so amazing about this book, because you think, it's been covered, Watergate, and yet you found someone who was taking careful notes and writing his own even story about the period before the tapes exist. So this is a window, and he was a bit of a pack rat. I mean, he had everything, right?
Yes, he did. Well, he had lots, yeah. But the real question here is the management of the Vietnam War. War is the index for, it tells us who we are to the world and to ourselves, and the Vietnam War still casts this giant shadow over the country, and it should. And what happened in the Vietnam War, and there's this new memo, the Zilch memo, which was buried and no one had ever seen it. I talked to people about it, oh no, it doesn't exist, and so forth, and there it is. And
tell us what the Zilch memo is.
Yes, right. It's Nixon in his own handwriting in early '72, when he's starting to run for re-election, saying that the bombing, 3 years of bombing which he'd ordered and supervised, accomplished zilch, nothing, and it was a total failure. And of course, this contradicts 3 years of pronouncements about the importance of the bombing. The night before he wrote that, he told CBS News, Dan Rather, that it was very, very effective. And so it's a lie, and it is a really significant lie, because then that year Nixon increased and intensified the bombing, and there are tapes and documents that show that it really was done because bombing was popular, according to the polling, and Nixon wanted to win re-election. And there's some hair-raising conversations about this. So you find the bombing was not to win the war, but to win re-election.
Yeah, in Nixon's own handwriting, basically saying, and he was pushing Kissinger to try and find some other new method that would be more effective.
and he wanted to study. And I asked Kissinger, and he said he doesn't remember the specific memo. He said that Nixon was frequently asking. He said, "I'll show you 50 memos where Nixon asked for more bombing." And you know, there is a social. I was in the Navy in the late 60s and served on a ship off the coast of Vietnam. There is a social contract between the commander-in-chief and everyone in the military. You do your job, I'll do my job. And the job of the commander-in-chief is to protect the military if we're engaged in wars, to try to win the war, not to use the means of dropping millions of tons of bombs to win re-election. I mean, that is monstrous behavior. It is, if there was a memo now that Barack Obama, who's doing all these drone strikes, where he said, well, we've done all these drone strikes for years, we've achieved zilch, and it's a failure, and that became public, people, I mean, he might be finished.
Yeah. That is the big monstrous behavior. What your book also categorizes or details, and Butterfield details, is the small ways in which Nixon was just a very strange character. Tell us about when Butterfield first comes into the job. Haldeman is his boss, and he won't introduce Butterfield to Nixon. Why?
Well, because it has to be done at the right time. There has to be a briefing memo on it, and it turned out he had to do it at a moment that was not planned, and so Nixon didn't know it was going to happen, and there was no talking point. You know, now this new deputy chief of staff is going to be here, and Nixon couldn't talk. And there is incident after incident where you see Nixon lonely, haunted by the past. You know, every little slight seems to be remembered. When he was on Wall Street as an attorney for being, after being vice president for 8 years, he rants and raves about those people who were my law partners, the SOBs. Did one of them ever invite me to his country club to play golf? Did he ever invite me to, and you know, this Nixon, unfortunately for him and for the country, never relaxed. He never sensed, gee, you're president, there's some goodwill out there, even among Democrats, because they want you to succeed. And so it was always this war. And so he was haunted by JFK, John F. Kennedy pictures that were discovered in the staff offices, and just went nuts about it, called it an infestation. And Butterfield had to conduct an investigation, and he wrote Nixon a memo, subject sanitization of the EOB staff offices.
All right, Bob Woodward, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you. A fascinating book. We'll be right back.